It was one of those perfect afternoons in Los Angeles where the sun seems to make everything look like a movie scene. The sky was a deep, clear blue, and the air was warm but comfortable. People were out on the streets, walking their dogs, carrying shopping bags, or just enjoying the day. In a city that is always moving and always noisy, this particular spot felt surprisingly calm. It was the kind of place where you could walk down the street and feel like just another face in the crowd, even if you were one of the most famous people in the world. Keanu Reeves was out for a stroll that day. He wasn't on a movie set, and there were no cameras rolling. There was no script to follow, and no director yelling cut. He was dressed in his usual simple style: a dark jacket, comfortable pants, and that familiar look of quiet focus on his face. To anyone who didn't look twice, he was just a regular guy taking a break. He has always been like that, someone who values his privacy and tries to live as normal a life as possible, despite the massive fame he has achieved over the years. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or assistants. He was just walking alone, enjoying his own thoughts and the vibe of the city. As he moved along the sidewalk, the world around him kept turning. Cars drove by with their windows down, music playing softly. A few people walked past him, glancing up, perhaps doing a double take as they realized who was passing them. You could see the surprise on their faces, the moment of recognition. But Keanu didn't stop for autographs or photos. He just kept a steady pace, his hands in his pockets, looking ahead. He seemed peaceful, totally unaware that this calm walk was about to take a strange and frightening turn. While the atmosphere felt safe to most people, there is always a different side to the city, just beneath the surface. A few blocks away from where Keanu was walking, two men were hanging around. They weren't there to enjoy the weather or go shopping. These men were street dealers, looking to make money and causing trouble wherever they went. They were restless, agitated, and scanning the area for someone who might look like an easy target. To them, the people on the street weren't neighbors or friends, they were just opportunities. The two men watched the crowd with sharp eyes. They were looking for someone who was alone, someone who seemed distracted or wealthy. They were predators waiting for the right moment to strike. The taller of the two looked down the street and noticed a man walking toward them. He didn't recognize the actor immediately. He just saw a solitary figure, walking with a relaxed stride, seemingly without a care in the world. That was all the invitation they needed. They nudged each other and muttered something under their breath, their body language shifting from lazy to aggressive. They decided right then that this was the person they were going to bother. Keanu continued walking, completely lost in his own world. Maybe he was thinking about a new script, or perhaps he was just enjoying the feeling of the sun on his face. He had no idea that two men had locked their eyes onto him. He didn't see the way they straightened up, puffing out their chests, trying to look intimidating. He didn't notice the sudden change in the air as the peace of the afternoon was quietly broken. As the distance between them closed, the two men stepped off the curb and moved directly into Keanu's path. They didn't try to hide their intentions. They wanted to be seen, they wanted to block his way. It was a classic tactic used by people looking to start trouble: corner someone suddenly so they feel trapped and scared. The anticipation of the confrontation seemed to energize them. They were ready for a fight, or at least ready to bully someone into giving them what they wanted. They expected fear. They expected this lone walker to panic, to look around for help, or maybe to hand over his wallet just to make them go away. But Keanu didn't break his stride. He just kept walking, one step after another, getting closer to the obstacle that awaited him. The contrast between the peaceful afternoon and the dark intentions of the two men was stark. On one side, you had a man simply trying to enjoy his day. On the other, you had two individuals looking to ruin it. The tension on the sidewalk became invisible but heavy, like a storm cloud gathering overhead. The few other people nearby sensed something was wrong and subtly gave the area a wide berth, not wanting to get involved in whatever was about to happen. Finally, Keanu was close enough that he had to acknowledge them. He could see that they weren't just standing there, they were blocking him on purpose. He could see the aggressive set of their shoulders and the looks on their faces. This was the moment where most people would cross the street or turn around. This was the moment where the peace of the afternoon shattered completely. The two men smiled, not friendly smiles, but the kind of smiles that show teeth and arrogance. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought they had cornered a harmless stranger. The taller man took a step forward, closing the gap even more. He opened his mouth to speak, ready to shout something demanding or rude. The noise of the street seemed to fade into the background for a few seconds. It was just the three of them now on that stretch of sidewalk. The sun was still shining, the birds were still chirping in the trees nearby, but the mood had turned ugly. The attack wasn't physical yet, but the intention was clear. They were going to harass him, intimidate him, and possibly hurt him. What happened next in those few seconds, and how Keanu reacted to this sudden threat, was something that no one could have predicted. The two men were ready for a victim, but they had no idea who they were actually messing with. They saw a man in a jacket, they didn't know the calm, steely resolve that lay underneath. As the afternoon breeze rustled the leaves of the street trees, the confrontation officially began. The quiet time was over, and a shocking real-life drama was about to unfold that would leave everyone who witnessed it absolutely stunned. The dealer made his move, stepping right in front of the actor, bringing the peace of the day to a screeching halt and setting the stage for a truly incredible response. The moment the two men stepped in front of him, the air on the street seemed to change completely. Just seconds before, it was a lazy afternoon with people minding their own business, but now, a sharp, dangerous tension sliced through the calm. The taller of the two men planted his feet firmly on the pavement, blocking Keanu's path. He didn't say hello or ask for directions. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted to intimidate. There was a look in his eyes that was hard and cold, the kind of look that says he is looking for a fight and doesn't care who gets hurt. Keanu stopped walking. He didn't stumble or look panicked. He simply came to a halt, keeping a respectful distance between himself and the strangers. He stood there with his hands at his sides, his posture relaxed but alert. To anyone watching, it looked like a collision of two different worlds. On one side, you had these chaotic, aggressive street dealers who thrived on fear and confusion. On the other, you had a man who has spent decades in the public eye, known for staying calm under pressure. He didn't immediately reach for his phone or look around for the police. He just stood there and looked at them, waiting to see what they would do next. The taller man decided to escalate things immediately. He leaned forward, getting right into Keanu's face, and started shouting. His voice was loud and jagged, echoing off the nearby buildings. He was demanding attention, trying to force a reaction. The words he was using were aggressive, filled with curse words and threats. He was posturing, puffing out his chest, trying to make himself look bigger and scarier than he actually was. It was a classic bully tactic: scream loud enough and act crazy enough, and most people will just give you what you want to make you go away. The second man, who had been standing slightly behind the first, started to move as well. He didn't shout as much, but his movements were threatening. He began to circle around to the side, cutting off any chance of escape. It was a predatory move, like two wolves cornering a lone animal. They were working together, trying to box Keanu in against a wall or a parked car. The trap was being set, and they were enjoying it. You could see the smirks on their faces. They thought they had found an easy target, a guy who looked like he had money and wouldn't want to get his clothes dirty in a street fight. Keanu watched them carefully. He didn't shout back. He didn't try to push past them. His expression didn't even show anger. It was a look of quiet assessment. He was measuring them, figuring out what they were capable of and what they really wanted. In that moment, he wasn't the action hero from the movies. He didn't have a team of stunt doubles to step in. He was just a human being facing two aggressive men who were physically threatening him. Most people in this situation would feel their heart racing, their hands shaking, or a cold sweat breaking out on their back. But Keanu remained incredibly still. The shouting continued. The dealer was waving his hands around, making wild gestures. He was demanding money, or maybe just respect. It was hard to tell what he really wanted through all the noise. He was trying to provoke Keanu, trying to make him flinch or show fear. He wanted to see that spark of panic in his eyes because that would give him power. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He held his ground, looking the man directly in the eyes. This lack of fear seemed to confuse the attacker. He wasn't getting the reaction he expected, and that made him angrier. By now, the people on the street had definitely noticed. A small crowd was starting to form a safe distance away. Pedestrians stopped walking. A couple of people pulled out their phones, not to help, but to record. It's a strange thing about human nature: when something bad is about to happen, many people freeze. They don't want to get involved, but they can't look away. They watched as the drama unfolded, whispering to each other. They recognized the actor, of course. Everyone knows Keanu Reeves. Seeing him in a situation like this felt surreal. It was like watching a scene from a movie, but without the safety of a script. The tension was getting unbearable. The verbal abuse was turning into physical threats. The taller man shoved his finger against Keanu's chest, poking him hard. It was a violation of personal space, a physical declaration of dominance. "What are you going to do about it?" the man seemed to be saying with his body language. He was daring him to make a move. He was waiting for Keanu to throw a punch so he could have an excuse to unleash his own violence. Keanu still didn't raise his hands. He didn't push the finger away. He stood there, absorbing the pressure. It was a display of patience that was almost superhuman. He knew that if he fought back, things could get out of control very quickly. He knew that one punch could lead to more, and that someone could get seriously hurt. He was weighing the situation, calculating the risks. He was trying to find a way out that didn't end in bloodshed. But the dealers weren't interested in a peaceful resolution. They were fueled by aggression and the thrill of the moment. The second man, sensing that his friend wasn't getting the fear he wanted, stepped up the intimidation. He started yelling too, adding to the noise and confusion. He kicked at a nearby trash can, sending it crashing to the ground with a loud clang. The noise made everyone jump, including the people watching from a distance. It was a clear sign of violence to come. They were showing that they were willing to break things, and they were willing to break people, too. The atmosphere was toxic now. The peaceful afternoon was completely gone, replaced by a thick fog of menace. Keanu glanced around for a split second. He saw the phones, the fearful faces, the closed shops nearby. He knew he was isolated. Even though there were people watching, he was essentially alone in that circle of aggression. The dealers had created a bubble where their rules applied. They were the predators, and in their minds, he was the prey. They fed off the power they felt in that moment. They were big men because they could scare someone. But then, something shifted. The taller man, frustrated by Keanu's silence and calmness, decided to stop talking. Words weren't getting him the rush he wanted. He wanted action. He wanted to see pain. His face twisted into a sneer, and he dropped his hands to his sides, balling them into fists. The taunting stopped. The circling stopped. The street went quiet for a heartbeat. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. Everyone watching held their breath. They knew what was coming. The confrontation had moved past the point of no return. The dealers weren't just going to yell anymore. They were going to strike. The taller man tensed his muscles, winding up like a spring. He looked at Keanu one last time, looking for any sign of weakness, any sign that he was going to run. But Keanu just stood there, ready. He wasn't going to run. The attack was imminent now. The dealers had made their choice, and they were committed to the violence. The calm was officially over, and the situation was about to explode into a physical altercation that would leave the entire street in shock. The anticipation of the blow hung heavy in the air, marking the end of the verbal standoff and the beginning of a real struggle. The silence that had fallen over the sidewalk shattered in an instant. The taller man didn't wait for a response or a signal. He just lunged. It wasn't a graceful move like you see in the movies where the bad guy telegraphs his punch so the hero can duck. It was messy, fast, and violent. He stepped in close, swinging his arm with the full weight of his body behind it. The intent wasn't just to scare, it was to hurt. He wanted to prove that he was in control, that he could physically impose his will on anyone he chose. The impact happened in a blur of motion. The man's fist connected, sending a shockwave through the air. Keanu, who had been standing so calmly just a moment before, took the hit. He didn't vanish into thin air, and he didn't dodge it like a ghost. He was human, flesh and bone like the rest of us. The force of the blow knocked him sideways. He stumbled back a step, his balance momentarily thrown off. It was a harsh, ugly reality check. There was no background music, no slow-motion effects, and no stunt coordinator to yell cut. This was the raw, unfiltered feeling of violence happening right in the middle of the street. The sound of the strike seemed to echo in the ears of the small crowd that had gathered. A collective gasp went up from the bystanders. Up until this point, it might have looked like just another argument, something that happens in a big city. But now, it was undeniably an assault. The illusion of safety had broken. People who were watching with mild curiosity suddenly felt a pit form in their stomachs. They realized that someone was actually getting hurt right in front of them. The man recording on his phone lowered his device slightly, shock registering on his face. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was dangerous. The dealer who had thrown the punch didn't stop there. Adrenaline was pumping through his veins, and he felt a surge of power. Seeing the famous actor stumble gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. He stepped forward again, shouting something unintelligible, his face contorted with rage. He was like a machine that had been turned on and couldn't be switched off. He raised his hands again, ready to swing a second time. He wasn't thinking about consequences or cameras. He was just reacting to the thrill of the moment, fueled by the aggression that had been building up inside him. The second attacker, seeing his partner land a blow, felt emboldened as well. He moved in closer, cutting off the angle, trying to trap Keanu against the wall of a nearby building. They were swarming now, like hyenas moving in for the finish. They expected their victim to crumble. They expected him to cower, to cover his head, to beg them to stop. That is how these things usually go. When violence is introduced, most people freeze or try to protect themselves instinctively. The dealers were banking on that fear. They wanted to see him break. But what happened next caught them completely off guard. Keanu regained his footing almost immediately. He didn't fall to the ground. He didn't cover his face and scream for help. He absorbed the hit and straightened his spine. There was a moment, just a split second, where he looked at the man who had hit him. He wasn't looking at him with the eyes of a victim. He was looking at him with a look that was almost analytical. It was as if he was processing the pain, acknowledging it, and then setting it aside. His expression didn't twist into anger. He didn't grit his teeth in rage. He just stood there, solid as a rock, ready for whatever came next. This is where the disconnect between Hollywood and reality became incredibly strange. Everyone watching knew who Keanu was. They knew him as the guy who played John Wick, the legendary assassin who can fight off 10 men at once. In the back of everyone's mind, there was this bizarre expectation that he was going to snap into action. The crowd was half waiting for him to unleash some martial arts move, to disarm the guys with a wrist lock or knock them out with a perfect punch. It felt like the tension was building toward that cinematic moment where the hero fights back and teaches the bullies a lesson. The air was thick with that anticipation. But Keanu didn't do a backflip. He didn't pull out a weapon. He didn't suddenly become a superhero. He remained firmly planted in the real world. He understood something that the attackers didn't. He knew that in a real street fight, there are no rules. If he fought back with full force, things could spiral out of control instantly. One of these men could have a knife, or a gun, or friends just around the corner. Fighting back might satisfy the ego, but it could also lead to tragedy. He was looking at the situation not as a movie scene, but as a life or death situation that needed to be de-escalated, not escalated. The dealers, however, were confused by his lack of retaliation. The taller man paused for a second, his fists still raised. He was waiting for the counterattack. He was ready for a brawl. When Keanu didn't throw a punch, the attacker hesitated. It threw off his rhythm. He shouted again, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to get the fear to show. "What's wrong with you?" he seemed to be asking with his body language. "Fight back." But Keanu just held his ground. He kept his hands in front of him, not in a fighting stance, but in a defensive, open posture. It was a stance that said, "I don't want to hurt you, but I'm not going anywhere." The second man tried to grab Keanu's shoulder, trying to shove him again. This was the critical moment. The physical contact was escalating. They were touching him, pushing him, invading his space. It was suffocating and intense. A lesser person might have lashed out in pure panic. The fear reflex is strong, and the urge to swing back when you are being hit is almost overwhelming. It takes a massive amount of self-control to stand there and take it, to not let the anger take over the driver's seat. Keanu's calmness in the eye of the storm was unnerving. It made the attackers look foolish. Here they were, screaming and flailing, using all this energy to be violent, and their target was just standing there, looking at them with a steady gaze. It highlighted the fact that they were the ones losing control. They were the ones acting like wild animals. By not fighting back, Keanu was stripping them of their power. He was refusing to play the game they wanted to play. They wanted chaos, and he was giving them stillness. The bystanders were holding their breath. The tension was at its absolute peak. It felt like the smallest spark could set off an explosion. If Keanu raised his hand now, the crowd would erupt, and the fight would be on. But he didn't. He took a deep breath, you could almost see his chest rise and fall, and he reset the moment. He looked the tall dealer in the eye, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the street. He didn't scream insults. He didn't make threats. He said something so unexpected, so simple, that it stopped the attackers in their tracks. The violence had reached its ceiling, the physical attack had happened, and the world hadn't ended. Now, it was time to change the narrative completely. The attack was over, but the real surprise was just beginning. The silence that followed the impact was heavy and strange. The tall dealer stood there with his fists still clenched, his chest heaving up and down. He was looking directly at Keanu, waiting for the explosion. He expected the famous actor to snap. In his mind, he had just thrown the first punch in a street brawl, and the natural next step was for the other guy to swing back. That is how the script usually goes in these situations. Someone hits, the victim gets angry, and suddenly everyone is fighting. The adrenaline was pumping through the attacker's veins, making his heart pound against his ribs. He was ready for a war. He wanted a war. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't roar in anger. He didn't charge forward to tackle the guy. Instead, he did something that completely defied the logic of the street fight. He simply adjusted his jacket. He looked down at where the blow had landed, maybe checking to see if he was bleeding, and then he looked back up. His face wasn't red with rage. It wasn't twisted in pain. He looked almost bored. It was the most disorienting thing the attackers had ever seen. They were throwing high-octane aggression at him, and he was responding with zero energy. Keanu took a small step back, not out of fear, but just to create a comfortable amount of space. He kept his hands open and visible in front of him, palms slightly out. It wasn't a fighting stance. It was a calming gesture. He looked the taller man right in the eyes, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice wasn't shaky or high-pitched. It was low, steady, and clear. He didn't scream insults. He didn't threaten to call the police. He just said something simple, something that cut through the tension like a knife. He told them to take it easy, that he wasn't looking for any trouble, and that they should probably just go on their way. The effect was immediate and confusing. The dealer's brain couldn't process it. He had just assaulted someone, and that someone was treating him like a misbehaving child rather than an enemy. The dealer blinked, his anger faltering for a second. He looked at his friend, then back at Keanu, trying to find the trick. Is he crazy, he might have wondered. Does he have a gun? Is he waiting for backup? The lack of fear was unnerving. When you bully someone, you feed on their fear. When there is no fear, the bully feels powerless. Keanu had taken their weapon away from them without touching them. He continued to speak, his tone remaining conversational. He didn't plead with them, which was key. If he had begged, they would have kept going. He just stood his ground and spoke to them like they were human beings who had made a mistake, rather than monsters who needed to be destroyed. It was a masterclass in emotional control. While the dealers were sweating, shouting, and vibrating with aggression, Keanu was an island of calm. He watched them with a quiet patience, as if he were waiting for a storm to pass by. The crowd watched in stunned silence. A few people had their phones up, recording, but even they were lowering them, forgetting to film because the reality was so much stranger than fiction. They were expecting a fight. They wanted to see the John Wick side of him. But what they were seeing was something rarer and more impressive, real-life grace under fire. They saw a man who had every right to be angry, every right to fight back, choosing instead to absorb the violence and let it die right there. It was a powerful moment that shifted the energy of the entire block. The second dealer, the one who had been circling, stopped moving. He saw the confusion on his friend's face. He saw that Keanu wasn't going to play the game. The air was leaking out of their balloon. The excitement of the fight was replaced by an awkward, heavy feeling. They looked ridiculous now. Here were two grown men, ganging up on one person, screaming and hitting, while that person stood there and politely asked them to stop. It highlighted the weakness of the dealers. It showed that their toughness was just an act, a thin shell covering their own insecurity. Keanu didn't break eye contact. He didn't look at the ground. He didn't look at the crowd for help. He engaged with them directly but gently. It was as if he was saying, "I see you, and I'm not afraid of you, so this is pointless." That kind of confidence is magnetic and terrifying to people who are used to relying on intimidation. The dealers had lost the psychological battle the moment Keanu decided not to fight. The taller man's arm dropped to his side. He looked less angry now and more confused. He mumbled something, trying to regain his tough exterior, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The shouting had stopped. The only sounds were the cars passing by on the main street and the distant hum of the city. The violence had evaporated, replaced by a surreal calmness that Keanu had created all by himself. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of just a minute ago. He stood there, waiting. He wasn't going to leave until he was sure it was over, but he wasn't going to escalate it either. He treated the situation like a minor annoyance, like a fly buzzing around his head. You don't fight a fly, you just wait for it to go away. By refusing to give them the fight they wanted, he made the fight impossible. The dealers were left with two choices: walk away or severely beat a man who was refusing to hit them back. Even in their warped state of mind, the second option didn't feel like a victory. It felt shameful. You could see the fight draining out of the dealer's posture. Their shoulders slumped. They looked at each other, silently agreeing that this wasn't worth it anymore. The thrill was gone. The fun of picking on someone had turned into a weird interaction where they were the ones who looked foolish. Keanu just watched them, his expression never changing. He was ready to stand there all day if he had to. He was a wall they couldn't climb over and a puzzle they couldn't solve. Finally, the taller man spat on the ground, a last-ditch effort to look tough. It was a weak gesture. He muttered a few final words, trying to save face, but they sounded hollow. Then, he turned around. The second dealer followed his lead. They didn't run away in fear. They just walked away, trying to look like they were the ones deciding to end it. But everyone watching knew the truth. They had been dismissed. They had been defeated not by fists, but by a total lack of engagement. As they retreated, Keanu didn't shout at their backs. He didn't shake his fist. He just watched them go until they were far enough away to be harmless. Then, he finally relaxed his stance. He took a deep breath, the kind you take after holding your breath underwater for a long time. He smoothed his shirt again, checking his clothes. He didn't look like a hero who had just won a battle. He looked like a guy who had just finished dealing with a difficult customer at a store. It was so casual, so ordinary, that it made the whole event even more incredible to witness. The danger had passed, and the peace he had maintained during the attack remained with him afterward. As the two men walked away, their figures getting smaller in the distance, the street seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for a long time. The danger that had choked the air just moments ago was fading, leaving behind a strange, quiet stillness. The sun was still shining, the cars were still driving by, and the world kept turning, but everything felt different for the people who had stood there and watched. It was like watching a thunderstorm pass directly overhead and then suddenly seeing the blue sky again. The tension was gone, replaced by a heavy sense of disbelief. Keanu stood alone on the sidewalk for a moment. He didn't immediately chase after the men, and he didn't start shouting at their backs. He didn't frantically dial 911 or look around for a police officer. Instead, he did something incredibly ordinary. He simply adjusted his jacket, smoothed down his shirt, and took a deep breath. He looked at his clothes, maybe checking for dust or dirt from the scuffle, with the same casual attitude you would use if you had just bumped into a doorframe. It was such a normal, human reaction to such an abnormal situation that it made the whole event feel even more surreal. The small crowd of bystanders, who had been frozen in place just seconds earlier, began to move again. The spell was broken. A few people stepped forward tentatively, their faces full of concern. They had just seen a man get punched and pushed around, and naturally, they wanted to make sure he was okay. You could hear the murmur of voices rising up, a mix of worry and confusion. "Are you all right?" someone asked. "That was crazy," another person whispered. Keanu turned his attention to the people around him. His face wasn't twisted in anger or distress. He actually looked quite calm. He nodded at the person who had asked if he was okay and gave a small, reassuring shrug. It was as if he was telling them not to worry, that he was fine, and that everything was under control. He didn't act like a victim who needed saving. He didn't act like a hero who wanted praise. He just acted like a guy who had dealt with a minor inconvenience and was ready to get on with his day. This reaction stunned the people watching even more than the fight itself. In a world where people often get angry over small things like someone spilling a coffee or cutting in line, seeing someone stay cool after being physically attacked was mind-blowing. The bystanders were looking at him with a mix of awe and curiosity. They were trying to figure out what was going on inside his head. Was he in shock? Was he just that tough, or was he really that peaceful? The irony of the situation was lost on no one. Everyone standing there knew who he was. They had all seen him in movies. They knew him as the guy who played John Wick, the character who is an unstoppable force of nature, a man who kills dozens of bad guys with a pencil and never gives up. When the attack started, a part of everyone's brain probably expected that movie magic to bleed into real life. They half expected Keanu to suddenly snap into action, to perform a karate kick, or to disarm the men with some cool move. They wanted the Hollywood ending where the bad guys get beaten up and the hero walks away in slow motion. But real life isn't a movie. In real life, violence is messy and dangerous. Fighting back can get you killed, or it can land you in legal trouble, or it can just make a bad situation infinitely worse. Keanu seemed to understand this better than anyone. He knew that he wasn't an invincible assassin. He was a human being. By choosing not to fight, he had actually done something much harder than fighting. He had controlled his ego. He had swallowed his pride. He had looked at two men who wanted to hurt him and decided that he wasn't going to let them drag him down into their chaos. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the conversations didn't stop. People were talking to each other, shaking their heads in amazement. "I can't believe he didn't hit him back," one person said. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," another replied. The story of what happened was already spreading, likely destined to be all over the internet within the hour. But it wasn't going to be a story about a celebrity fight. It was going to be a story about character. Keanu checked his surroundings one last time, making sure the dealers were truly gone and that no one else was approaching him. Satisfied that the coast was clear, he put his hands back in his pockets. He didn't ask for anyone's name. He didn't sign any autographs. He didn't make a big speech about peace or love. He didn't turn the moment into a lecture. He just offered a polite nod to the people who had checked on him, turned on his heel, and continued walking down the street. It was the most low-key exit possible for such a high-drama situation. He just went back to his day. He had places to be, things to do, and he wasn't going to let two angry strangers ruin his afternoon. As he walked away, you could see the relaxed return to his posture. The incident was over for him. He had processed it, dealt with it, and now he was leaving it in the past. Watching him walk away, people felt a strange sense of respect. It's easy to respect someone for being strong or fast or rich. But it is rare to see someone who is truly in control of themselves. The dealers had tried to take his dignity, but they failed. By refusing to engage in their violence, he had kept his dignity intact. They were the ones who looked foolish and weak in the end, running away with their tails between their legs. He was the one who stood tall. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always about how hard you can hit. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is to stand your ground, protect yourself without hurting others, and choose peace over war. It's a lesson that sounds simple, but in the heat of the moment, it is incredibly difficult to pull off. Most of us, if we are honest, would probably have swung back. We would have let the anger take over. But Keanu showed a different path. As he disappeared into the flow of the city, becoming just another person on the sidewalk again, the people who witnessed it were left with a lasting impression. They hadn't just seen a movie star, they had seen a class act. They had seen a man who lives by a code, even when no one is watching. The dealers might have thought they attacked an easy target that day, but they were wrong. They ran into a man who is stronger in real life than any character he has ever played on screen. And the fact that he won the battle without throwing a single punch is what makes the story truly unforgettable. It leaves everyone thinking, not just about what happened, but about how they might handle themselves when the world tries to knock them down.